Hey guys, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having an incredible day today. In today's video, we are going to be covering another Mystery Monday case for my 12 days of Christmas, where I'm doing 12 mystery videos for 12 days. So if you guys are enjoying these, I really hope that you are. Make sure to give this video a big thumbs up for me so I know that you do, and let's go ahead and get into it. Before we do get into today's case, I just want to thank today's sponsor, Function of Beauty. I'm sure you guys already know by now that I swear by Function of Beauty's shampoo and conditioner. I've been using them for over a year and a half now, and ever since I made the switch, my hair has literally never been so strong and so healthy, even though I have so much color in it now. They are 100% customizable, so it's always going to be tailored to exactly what your hair needs and exactly what your hair goals are. You even get to personalize the scent, what's written on your bottles. I got Function of Hot Stuff, of course, because look at me. And not only can you customize the shampoo and conditioner itself to make sure it's perfect for your hair needs, but you can also customize literally everything about them. You can customize the scent, you can customize what's written on it. So I have Function of Hot Stuff, thank you very much. And you can customize the colors, which is perfect because it always looks cute in the bathroom. I just ran out of my last shampoo and conditioner from Function of Beauty, and I had purple and green, and it was a massive vibe. But this time I decided to go with pink and yellow, which I just think is so cute. I'm obsessed. And with every single order, they also send you these really cute stickers, so if that's your vibe, you can put them on and it looks amazing. They just released a new limited edition scent for the holidays as well, and oh my goodness, it is just divine. It is called, it's called Isn't She Bubbly? It's like this champagne-y, citrusy goodness, and it is just so yummy. So for me, I got mine customized to strengthen, volumize, for shine, for anti-frizz, and also for curl definition, because when I was younger, I used to have really curly hair, like ringlets, and now it's just kind of like wavy. There's no yucky stuff in it, like no GMOs, no toxins, no parabens, no sulfates, so it's all really good stuff. If you guys are interested, you can get 20% off your order. If you want to head to the link that I'll have in my bio, if you click on that, it'll take you to get your 20% off your order. So make sure you guys check that out, and let's go ahead and get into today's video. In December of 1990, the Tita family planned to spend their Christmas just like they did every year, with family in their quiet, secluded cabin in the mountains of Utah. This Christmas, however, would unfortunately end in tragedy. Rolf Tiede was born on the 29th of September in 1939 in Germany. When he was just 11 years old, he and his mother immigrated to the US, where they met Kay Tidwell when he was in his early 20s. Kay was born on the 16th of January in 1941 in Nevada to Eugene and Beth Tidwell. The two hit it off right away. They married on the 24th of May in 1963 in Salt Lake City, and eventually they relocated to Humble, which is in Texas, and they were both very devoted to their religion, very active members of the LDS Church. They were also very big family people. They dreamed of having a lot of little babies together, and in the first few years of their marriage, however, they did have trouble conceiving, so they adopted their first child named Lene. 3 years later, they adopted their second child, a son named Sean, and then within just a couple of weeks of adopting Sean, the couple discovered that Kay was actually pregnant, 2 months pregnant, with their daughter Trisha. Their lives were just going really wonderfully at this point. They had 3 beautiful children, they had a happy marriage, and Kay was described as a very devoted mother who would give up anything for her children. Rolf was a successful salesman, and in 1969 he opened a Skyline Equipment Incorporated in Houston. Every year the Tiede family would visit their remote cabin in Oakley, which was in a small town in Utah, and in the 1990s I think it only had like a population of like 600 people, so it was a really small little town, and their cabin itself was super secluded. It was somewhere they would go to like disconnect from the world and connect with family and spend like some real good quality time together. Every year they would hold this like annual Christmas party they had with close friends and family, and Kay actually referred to the cabin as Tiede's Tranquility because it was up in the mountains, it was surrounded by aspen trees and this picturesque river, and it was just like a really, really beautiful place. or is a really beautiful place. Now, when I say this place is secluded, I mean it was like really secluded. Like it was like 4 kilometers from the road, and the only way that you could get there in winter was to park your car like 4 kilometers away and then get on these snowmobiles to take you up to the cabin. So like I said, December of 1990 was no different. They planned to spend their Christmas holidays there like they did every other year. So on the 20th of December, Kay and her son Sean flew in from Texas to Oakley, where Kay's sister Claudia was there waiting at the airport to pick the two of them up. Rolf, Lene, and Trisha were going to arrive the next day on the 21st of December because Rolf and Kay, they like to travel separately and like halve the family. So one parent would go one day with one sibling, and then another parent would go another day on a separate flight with the other siblings, so that like if anything happened, then there would still be like one parent to look after the children. I don't know. Interesting. Kay, Sean, and Kay's sister Claudia headed to the garage. They parked the car in the garage, loaded up everything from the car to the snowmobiles, took the snowmobiles up to the cabin on the 20th of December. About halfway up to the cabin, they passed this like man. He would have been in his early 20s, and it just looked a little off because it was negative 20 degrees, so it was freezing cold. This guy was wearing tennis shoes, jeans, and a light jacket. It's just not what you would have been wearing in this weather, especially like up in the mountains where there's all this snow and they have to ride snowmobiles up to the cabin. So obviously it seemed like something was a little off. Maybe like there was something wrong. Maybe he needed some help. So Kay decided to stop and ask him if he was okay. And he just like kind of walked off faster and didn't say anything, didn't pay any attention to them, which Kay definitely thought was like a little sketchy, but she's not gonna like push the guy. So they just headed back on their way to the cabin. Once they got up to the cabin, Kay and Sean unpacked all of their belongings that they'd brought from Texas, and the three of them with Kay's sister Claudia had a really nice dinner. They had a nice catch up together, and Claudia decided to stay the night at the cabin with them. The next day, on the 21st of December, Rolf arrived with 22-year-old Lene and 16-year-old Trisha. When they first arrived at the cabin, Kay was telling Rolf all about this like strange guy that they had seen on the way up to the cabin, and she was just like kind of a bit wigged out by it. So she was like, can you please bring the shotguns with you, load them onto the snowmobile, and bring them up to the cabin? Because she was just like feeling uneasy. She just wanted to feel safe and protected in her own cabin, which is fine. He obviously didn't experience the interactions, so he was like, you know, we don't need the shotguns, it's fine, especially because it was like a really safe place. Like in the last 100 years, there had only been one violent incident, which was a shooting, and it was a road rage incident, and then there'd be like a couple of burglaries in the area, and that was it. Like it was a very safe place to be, but Kay insisted. She was just feeling uneasy and she just thought it would put her mind at ease. So he loaded up the shotguns onto the snowmobile, brought the rest of their belongings, and headed up to the cabin. Claudia also left that morning so that she could run some last minute errands, do some last minute Christmas shopping herself before the Christmas party that they were going to have in a couple of days' time. So after she left, the Tiede family unpacked Rolf, Lene, and Trisha's belongings. They wrapped Christmas presents that they'd brought with them. They set up their Christmas tree, they hung their stockings, and they just spent some quality time together. After that, they then headed into town to do sort of the same thing as Claudia, stock up on some supplies that they needed for the Christmas party, do some last minute Christmas shopping, that sort of thing. After the Christmas shopping was done, Sean wanted to stay with his Aunt Claudia for the night, so they dropped him off, and then they headed over to Kay's mother's place where they were going to spend the night. The rest of the family was going to spend the night. Kay's mother was Beth Potts. She was 72 years old, and she was still super lively despite losing most of her eyesight and also most of her mobility in a car accident in 1983. They had a lovely night there catching up, and the next day, on the 22nd of December at around noon, Kay, Beth, and Lene headed back to the Tiede cabin. Rolf and Trisha must have like gone into town or something, or like stayed back to clean, or I don't know what they were doing, but they were a couple of hours behind them on their way to the cabin. So as Kay, Beth, and Lene arrived to the cabins on their snowmobiles, as they were coming up, Lene saw like a shadowy figure in the master bedroom, and she started to get super excited because she thought it was her cousin David who had arrived early and was there to surprise them. So as soon as they got there, Lene ran straight inside to the kitchen to run her hands under some hot water, and as she was doing so, she saw the shadowy figure behind the fridge, and she was kind of like laughing to herself. She thought it was her cousin David, and she was like just waiting for him to jump out and like scare her or surprise her. The next thing she knew, however, there was a man with frizzy hair who stepped out from behind the fridge and pointed a gun at her. He made Lene call her mother and her grandmother upstairs, and as Kay helped her grandmother up the stairs, another man who appeared seemingly out of nowhere with these like thick Coke bottle glasses held a gun to Kay and her mother Beth. Kay immediately started like pleading with them. She was like, what do you want? Why are you here? Please, like, I will give you anything. And without hesitation, the man with the fuzzy hair pointed the gun at her and shot her. As she fell to the ground, he then pointed the gun at her mother Beth and shot her in the head. And as Beth was scrambling to get up, he then shot her again. I think he shot her like a total of 3 times, and then under his breath he muttered, "This bitch won't die." So obviously this guy is like super evil, because not only did he seemingly shoot her for no reason, like she was literally there pleading with him, like saying, "I will give you anything," and then without hesitation he shot her, but also to shoot a mother and a grandmother in front of their daughter and granddaughter, like that is just so evil and so traumatizing. The men then dragged Lene into the bedroom, where they duct taped a dirty sock to her mouth and tied both her hands and her feet up. Then, weirdly enough, the guy with the Coke bottle glasses like brought the family dog in to the bedroom where she was to like comfort her. After that, they went back out to Kay and Beth's bodies, where they took all of the jewelry off them, they took anything of value, any money that they had on them, and then they moved their bodies out onto the patio and covered them in snow. Meanwhile, Lene is freaking out, not only because there's these 2 guys that just shot her mother and grandmother in front of her, but because she knew that any minute her father Rolf and her sister Trisha were gonna pull up to the cabin, and she had no way to warn them. So Rolf and Trisha did pull up. They pulled up at around 2:45 p.m. As they pulled up, the frizzy hair man put a gun to Lene's back and dragged her out to the front of the cabin, while the man with the Coke bottle glasses held a gun to Rolf and Trisha, and he was saying to Rolf, like, empty your pockets. And it was really sad too, because apparently Rolf looked into Lene's eyes, and just by looking at the fear and sadness in her eyes, he just knew that Kay and Beth were dead. So Rolf immediately starts emptying his pockets. He empties like $105 out of his pockets, and he's basically saying like, please, I will literally give you anything. But these men just didn't care, because they were just bad people. It's like they just wanted to murder somebody that day. So the guy with the frizzy hair, because he was holding a gun to Lene's back, he ordered the man with the Coke bottle glasses to shoot Rolf. So this guy cocks his gun, and then he just stands there for like 30 seconds to a minute, doesn't shoot, obviously must be like freaking out, doesn't want to kill somebody. So the frizzy hair guy just pulls out his gun and he shoots the trigger, but the gun doesn't go off. So he shoots it a second time, and again, the gun doesn't go off, which just, can you imagine how terrifying that would be? To hear that trigger go off and just waiting for it to happen and it doesn't happen twice in a row would be so terrifying. And then the third time he pulls his trigger, it goes off, and he shot Rolf in the face. Trisha was just hysterical at this point. She was like jumping up and down, screaming, because her dad was literally shot in the face right in front of her. She's 16 years old. The Tiede family also had like these gas cans at the house, which they used to fuel up their snowmobiles. So these guys grabbed these cans of gas and they started like just dousing the house with them, because I guess that was their plan, to get rid of any fingerprints or any DNA or any evidence that they might have left at the scene, because they definitely weren't careful. Like, before anyone from the Tiede family arrived, they were like eating their food, they were like laying in their beds, they were opening their presents, like they weren't careful. They were like living like kings in the house for the small amount of time that they were there. And I guess it must have been because they knew that they were going to set the house on fire to get rid of any of that evidence. After they doused the house on fire, they went back out to Rolf and they shot him in the back of the head again just to make sure he was dead, and put a little bit of gas on him so that when the house set on fire that it would probably like come and get him as well, because they didn't actually like set him on fire, they only set the house on fire, I guess just assuming it would eventually make its way to Rolf. And then they set the cabin on fire. They then ordered the two girls, Lene and Trisha, to fill up the snowmobiles with all of the stuff that they'd taken from the house, and they made them drive the snowmobiles down to the garage while they held the two girls at gunpoint. As they headed down to the garage, they passed the girls' uncle, Randy, and I guess Randy just thought the two guys on the snowmobiles were their boyfriends, and he like waved to them, and they just like totally ignored him, like acted like he did not exist. They thought that if they acknowledged him and if these two guys knew that Randy was their uncle, that he was family, that they would try and shoot him as well. So it was really smart on their behalf. Obviously, Randy was a little thrown off though, but he just thought it was like teenagers being teenagers, like teenagers get a boyfriend and then they start like being little teenage assholes, you know. So anyway, they kept going until they got to the garage. The two men then ordered the girls to load everything from the snowmobiles into the family's Lincoln Town car. It seems like the men kind of had a loose plan of what they wanted to do. So they planned on like driving this car to New York, and then once they got to New York, they would let Trisha and Lene go, which obviously Trisha and Lene, like they weren't stupid girls and they did not think that they would be let out alive once they got to New York, but what else could they do? Like they can't defy these guys who are holding a gun to them and just shot their entire family right in front of them, so they just like had to go along with it. So they get in the car, the frizzy haired man is in the driver's seat, Lene is in the passenger seat, and then in the back seat is Trisha and the guy with the Coke bottle glasses, and as they start driving, they pass Randy again in his car. And this time he's like waving at them, he's like yelling at them, like trying to motion for them to stop. Again, the girls didn't want him to die, so they didn't acknowledge him once again, and then the frizzy-haired man asked them, like, do you know this guy? Who is this guy? And they were like, I don't know, just some random. I'm not sure why he's, like, waving and yelling at us. They just acted like they didn't know him, and this time, Randy definitely knew something was off, and then, like, a minute after this interaction, a man on a snowmobile starts, like, coming towards Randy. Obviously, like I mentioned, really cold. It was, like, negative 20 degrees, but this person coming towards him had no jacket on, he had no shoes on, no helmet on, and his face was in really bad shape. Like it was really swollen, it was bleeding, there was like blood icicles coming off of his face from where his face had like dripped blood, but it was negative 20 degrees, so it just froze instead. And his face was so swollen that his eyes were like puffed shut, like he almost couldn't see out of them. And as this man got closer to Randy and got off the snowmobile, Randy realized it was actually his brother Rolf. Rolf starts telling him this crazy story about what had happened, that they'd shot his wife Kay, that they'd shot his mother-in-law Beth, and that they'd also tried to shoot him, and that's why he looked the way that he did. Turns out this guy's shotgun was actually a birdshot shotgun. So in the shotgun like shell casings, instead of there being a bullet, there was actually like a bunch of tiny little metal pellets. Obviously at such close range, this could still kill somebody, especially because they came back and shot him in the back of the head to like make sure he was dead. So it was still incredibly lucky that he was still alive, despite the fact that it was a birdshot shotgun instead and not an actual bullet. After the men doused him in gas, he just laid there, he just played dead until he couldn't hear the snowmobiles anymore. And then he got up, he tried to go in the cabin to put out the fire, but they had put gasoline everywhere, so this fire had spread really quickly. His jacket actually ended up setting on fire as well. I think a little bit might have melted into his skin. So he had to rip his jacket off, go outside, get on one of the snowmobiles, and go and try and find his daughters who had been kidnapped by these crazy murderous people while he had no jacket on. His face had been shot, the back of his head had been shot. Like, it's crazy that he was even able to do all of this. Like, adrenaline is a crazy thing.
I later learned that Dad had actually been doused with gasoline and he caught on fire himself, and he had to run into the shower and tear off his snowsuit while on fire. Having the strength to get on the snowmobile and race down that mountain to save my sister and I. How much blood he'd lost, how he couldn't see, getting down the mountain in freezing temperatures. My whole life, my dad was my hero, and that just put an exclamation point on that.
And obviously when he got on the snowmobile and was driving, that's when he ran into his brother Randy and told Randy the whole story, and obviously he wasn't doing well. So Randy lifted him into the back seat of his car and took off down Canyon Road, and he was just like dialing 911 over and over and over again because the reception was really bad. Not only were they in a mountain, so the reception still probably isn't that great, but this was 1990 as well. It took him a bunch of tries, but eventually he managed to get through to 911. He told them the whole story. He told them where the girls were and what sort of car they were in, the Lincoln Town car. And he also told them that he needed a helicopter for his brother right before his phone died. So he pulled into a gas station, which is where he went onto the payphone to call 911 again, tell them again everything had happened, and that he really needed a helicopter to come and get his brother, who was in really bad shape. All the while this is happening, the two girls are in the car driving down Canyon Road with these two guys, and a police vehicle passes them. And as the police vehicle passes, it does a U-turn behind them and starts following them. I don't know if he heard, like, if the 911 call had already been reported or if they just looked sus. Like, I'm sure Lene in the front seat was not looking like a happy chappy. So maybe he just noticed something was off and did a U-turn, or I don't know, the 911 call had come through. The men started freaking out. They ended up getting into a high-speed chase. They were going like 90 miles per hour, which is about 145 kilometers an hour. So very fast speeds. They went straight through a police roadblock as well, trying to flee from the cops chasing them. The chase ended about 65 kilometers from the Tiede's cabin when they spun out and got stuck on an embankment. The two men panicking at this point. And the man with the frizzy hair starts saying, "We're gonna die," and the other man with the Coke bottle glasses is like, "Nope, we are not going to die here." When Trisha and Lene looked out of the car, there was just a whole bunch of police and a whole bunch of just regular civilians who were standing around the car with their guns drawn toward them. The girls just held hands, they ducked, and just like crossed their fingers that they would make it out alive. The men were arrested without much trouble. I think there was like a little bit of back and forth gunfire, but the police ended up dragging them from the vehicle out into the snow on their knees and arresting them. At around the same time, a helicopter finally arrived for Rolf as well, and they airlifted him to a hospital, and he made a full recovery, which is crazy because when I was researching this case and I read that he was coming towards Randy in that snowmobile, I was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it, especially after that second shot to the back of the head. So anyway, after this, police went to the cabin to survey the crime scene, of course, and when they got there, they said that the cabin looked like a mini war zone. Like, it was bad. There was blood everywhere, there was blood spatter everywhere, there was bullet holes, and like in the staircase there was actually a bullet that went from one side of the staircase and then out the other side of the staircase. They also described that when they arrived, the whole place just smelled like burnt hair.
I could see holes in the wall, bullet holes coming from one wall across the stairwell into the other wall. There was a blood smear on the wall. It looked like a bloody hand had wiped down the wall. And it almost looked like a mini war zone.
They also ended up finding a video camera that had a tape inside it, which was actually recorded by the two killers, and they were seen in the video like opening the Tiede's presents, and they were like calling out which family member each present belonged to before tearing them open and making jokes about all of the gifts. So the two men were 26-year-old Von Taylor and 22-year-old Edward Deli. Taylor was the man with the frizzy hair, the like ringleader of the whole thing, and then Deli was the man with the thick Coke bottle glasses, and he just like kind of seemed to be along for the ride or something. Both of the men had actually served time at the Utah State Penitentiary. Taylor was there for aggravated burglary, and Deli was in there for arson. They met at a halfway house after being released, and the whole murder spree started because the police were meant to like let them out to give them an opportunity to get a job and get back into society, but they used this as an opportunity to just straight up leave. They left the halfway house on the 14th of December and they hitchhiked to Oakley, where Taylor's father also owned a cabin in the area. And then they just spent like a week or so before the murders just kind of burglarizing cabins in the area. They passed the Tiede cabin on the 20th of December, which, if you remember, when Kay and Claudia and Sean were on the snowmobiles up to the cabin and they passed the guy and Kay stopped to ask him if he was okay and he didn't say anything and just like scudded off, that was actually Von Taylor. He was scoping out the area at the time, and he broke into their house on the 22nd of December with Edward Deli. And like I said, before the Tiede family got back, they just kind of acted like they owned the place, sleeping on the beds, opening the presents, eating the food, that sort of thing. Because of the burglaries that they had made in their area, they were obviously planning to get out, so I guess that's when they came up with the plan to steal the Tiede family's car and then use their two daughters as human shields on their way to New York. The two men were arraigned on the 22nd of January before District Judge Frank Noel. They were each charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, theft, arson, and failure to heed to a police signal to stop. Both of the men pled not guilty by reason of insanity, but after court evaluation, both men were deemed fit to stand trial. 5 months later, Taylor ended up pleading guilty to 2 counts of capital murder in exchange for all the other charges being dropped, which seemed like a weird choice to me because capital murder carries the death penalty. So what's the point of even getting all of the other charges dropped if you're pleading guilty to something that carries the death penalty? I don't know. I didn't really like that. Just seemed like a weird decision to me. Anyway, he had to go to a sentencing hearing. In his sentencing hearing, there was evidence that was presented to basically say that he was the ringleader of the whole thing. He shot the 2 women and that he had no remorse for anything that he had done. Medical examiner Dr. Sharon Schnicker testified that Sharon had been shot 5 times. Twice in the chest, once on the side, once in the shoulder, and once in the upper arm area. The fatal shot was said to be the one that entered through her shoulder and then pierced internal organs. Beth Potts had been shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the head, and the fatal shot was the one to her head. Both women were shot with a .44 caliber gun, which both Lene and Trisha testified was the gun that Taylor was using. When Rolf entered the room, Taylor was shocked that he was still alive because he shot him in the face, he shot him in the back of the head, he doused him with gas and then set the cabin on fire. So obviously there's no way that he thought that he was still alive, and he actually had no idea until the trial that he had lived. So when he walked into the room, like, he must have been like, what the hell, didn't I literally kill you? He still had visible scars on his face, and Rolf said that it was really gratifying for him to come in there and to be able to testify. It was like a weight off of his shoulders. Taylor also testified on his own defense, but it was not ideal for him. He literally had no remorse, he had no emotion, and he was really argumentative, and he just like didn't tell the whole story, so it just really didn't look good for him. The jury ended up sentencing him to death for both counts, so 2 consecutive death penalties. Edward Deli, however, did not plead guilty. He decided to take his chance with a jury trial, which began 2 weeks after Taylor was sentenced. And like Taylor, he had no idea that Rolf had survived, so it was a massive shock once again when he walked in the room, especially because Deli was the one who couldn't actually bring himself to pull the trigger. The prosecution did try to paint him as like this cold-blooded killer, he had no remorse, and that he was just as complicit in the murders as Taylor was, despite the fact that he wasn't actually the one that pulled the trigger. His lawyer, Martin Gravis, however, tried to say that Taylor was the ringleader and Deli was just this guy who became friends with the wrong person. Which, I don't know, I tend to think that you are a reflection of your friends. They're the people that you choose to be friends with, you know what I mean? And he was there, he was along for the whole ride. They were burglarizing houses the whole time before. He didn't say anything, like he was 110% complicit as well. But his lawyer argued that he refused to kill Rolf, that he also was like trying to bring Lene comfort by like bringing the dog into the bedroom. Anyway, the jury deliberated for 12.5 hours before they came back with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. There was only one juror who didn't think he was responsible of the murders, but they came to an agreement of charging him with a lesser charge of second-degree murder instead of not coming to a verdict and then making the Tiede family sit through this whole painful ordeal again. Like, Trisha and Lene said that it was traumatizing for them having to be up on the stand, and like they even had to hold the murder weapons, and they were 22 and 16 years old. Deli was, however, still sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Shortly after the trials ended, the Tiede family ended up filing a wrongful death lawsuit against the state of Utah for Kay and Beth's deaths, and they said that it wasn't about the money for them, but the only way to actually get the state's attention and realize what they had done wrong was monetarily, like through their pockets. They basically said that the deaths could have been prevented by the state and that the state failed to detain these men despite knowing that they had escaped from the halfway house and knowing that they were in Oakley and knowing of their plans. On the 22nd of December, Von Taylor actually called another guy from the halfway house named Scott Manley. He told him that they had stolen guns and that they'd been burglarizing a bunch of places in Oakley. He also told him that he was at the Tiede's cabin, that he was waiting for them to come home, that he was going to waste the parents and the son, Sean, and that he was then going to steal the girls or like kidnap the girls, steal their car, and use them as a human shield to get to New York. This guy that he called, Scott Manley, immediately reported this to halfway house officials, and they basically failed to do anything about it, which resulted in Kay and Beth's deaths. In September of 1992, however, Judge Noel ruled that the state of Utah wasn't responsible, that there were some sort of laws in place that protected the government from any liability of the sort. In 2001, Lene received a letter from Edward Deli. He basically said that he was sorry, that he wasn't the same person that he used to be. He was a boy back then, he was a man now, and that he was really sorry for any of the pain that he had caused her. And she read this over and over and over again for 10 years until she finally decided to respond. She decided to forgive him just so that sort of weight could be lifted off her shoulders. Rolf remarried 3 times after Kay's murder and eventually found happiness with her best friend Donna, which, you know, I know he's been through a lot, but I don't know how I feel about that. If I died and Carrie ended up with my best friend, I would be cursing them from the grave. But I guess they were probably both, you know, really dealing with something horrible, having their best friend and their wife died, and maybe that's what brought them together. Rolf loved spending the rest of his years with his children, his wife, and his grandchildren until 2008 when he passed away from cancer. Trisha married and had 2 children who she loves with her whole heart, although her and her husband did end up divorcing. Sean married and had 3 children, and he also ended up following in his father Rolf's footsteps and became a salesman himself. After Lene's first marriage ended in divorce, she ended up marrying her childhood sweetheart, who was named Nathan Coates. The two joined their families and have 9 children together.
After the cabin had burnt, we went and rebuilt it and made it even better than it was before.
We actually go up there and enjoy family and friends, and we play and we relax, we bond. You know, they're not going to take away from us the things that we love and we enjoy in our life. They took our mom, they took our grams, but that's where it ends.
The cabin's magical. The cabin is healing.
Edward Deli has not appealed his sentence, and it's likely he'll never get out of jail because I don't think any judge in their right mind would approve his parole. I don't know. Maybe he'll get out one day, but they're pretty messed up crimes he committed, so. Taylor, however, has appealed his sentence multiple times, and the first 3 or 4 appeals, I think, were all denied. He claimed his trial was unfair because 75% of the jury was Mormon, but of course, like I said, that was denied. In 2019, however, a judge ruled that despite the fact that he was likely involved in the crimes and despite his guilty plea, that it couldn't be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that his gun is the gun that killed Kay and Beth. They tried to say that the .44 caliber gun that was used to shoot Kay and Beth was actually Edward Deli's gun, and that Taylor's gun was a .38 caliber, which, I mean, honestly doesn't really mean much to me because he could have just been using Edward Deli's gun. But anyway, they say there was nothing but witness testimony to say that he was actually using the .44 caliber gun. Taylor's defense attorney from the 1991 trial, Elliot Levine, was actually said to have provided him with deficient representation, and his bar certification in Utah has actually been suspended. So Taylor was declared innocent. And I was a little confused by this because innocent to me means get out of jail, hasn't done anything wrong. But apparently it doesn't mean he's going to get a new trial. It didn't mean that he was actually innocent. It didn't mean he was going to get out of jail. It just meant his execution was delayed. Okay, that is so annoying. I have zero idea how long my microphone was turned off for, so I apologize for the bad audio right there. So anyway, in March of this year, 2020, a US district judge named Tina Campbell actually overturned now 54-year-old Von Taylor's conviction. She said his guilty plea was unconstitutional, that it must be invalidated because his death sentence was based on his invalid guilty plea, so it must be vacated. I have no idea what this means for Taylor, honestly. I do know that the Utah District Attorney's Office does plan on appealing this, but that's all the updates I could find up until now, December of 2020. But that is everything for this case. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, and hopefully I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys!